In Part 2 of this introductory series on alchemy, we'll be reviewing some information given in Part 1, and primarily diving into an exposition of alchemical theory. We'll cover the basic fundamentals of general alchemical philosophy, and the application of this philosophy and theory more specifically within the context of Spagyric alchemy. I'm Ike Baker, and this is Arcanum. As mentioned in Part 1 of the series, alchemy is a philosophical methodology. What that means is that the difference between herbalism and other forms of herbal, mineral, metallic, and animal preparations is that the sequence of operations must be done in accordance with the underlying philosophy. This philosophy is directly based on the Hermetic philosophy contained within the Corpus Hermeticum, primarily the Emerald Tablet. In essence, the core of the Emerald Tablet intimates a mirror-like relationship between terrestrial and celestial realms and functions. This establishes the doctrine of the Microcosm and Macrocosm. This doctrine was posited centuries earlier by Plato in the dialogue Timaeus, wherein the universe is said to be an ensouled being in the same way a person is ensouled. This relationship is central to alchemical philosophy and theory. Some regard it as a metaphysical relationship, a mystery, as these traditions have been referring to it for millennia. Some prefer to use what we understand of modern science to find correlations. For instance, in the fact that the star stuff of all creation exists within every atom of our physical beings. In my estimation, it is likely a little bit of both and more. We'll spend some time in this video breaking down what is called the Emerald Formula, but first, let's further examine the cosmology which gives rise to this philosophy. In the Hermetic literature of the early centuries of the Common Era, as well as the Neoplatonic thought which existed in tandem and consonance with early Hermetism, primarily in the Alexandrian schools, the ultimate conception of deity took the form of the monad. This idea stemmed from the Pythagorean philosophy established at least 5 centuries earlier, which expressed a species of number mysticism. However, coming full circle, it is believed that Pythagoras received his initiatory and mystical training, at least in part, at the hands of the ancient Egyptian priesthood. The monad, from the Greek monas, meaning unit, is the single unity which precedes all creation, in the way that in order to have any quantity of a thing, you must at least have one. This is the basis upon which all alchemy rests in its entirety. It is the emanative creative hierarchy of order which must come forth from this pre-existing unity. In this case, these stages or states of manifestation create levels of being which are codependent, interpenetrative, and relational with and to each other, forming what could be philosophically conceptualized as a network, or a ladder, from the most dense state to the most subtle or rarefied. The permutation of the elements and materials in alchemy is predicated entirely upon this idea of an underlying unity which exists before and within every single created thing. This is the monad. The monad itself, first generated, contains all subsequent possibilities and potentialities within itself, and begins the sequence of generation by generating a dyad, a polarity, establishing the boundaries and parameters of further creation, as well as the spectrum between this polarity. The binary itself creates a magnitude of permutation by creating space for potentialities of interaction. In a sense, we could analogize this to an artist, perhaps choosing a canvas of a certain width, height, or material, as well as a specific binary of color, from which they will generate their color palette. This polarity can be conceptualized more appropriately as active and receptive. In alchemy, we call these celestial salt and celestial niter, being the receptive and active powers, respectively. From the dyad, the triad is created. The triad formed by the dyad is the Tria Prima of alchemy, philosophical salt being the manifestation of celestial salt on a more dense plane, philosophical sulfur being the manifestation of celestial niter on the same, and philosophical mercury being the neutral or androgynous state that can be either or neither, a combination of the energies of both active and passive states. For anyone interested in the science of music, this can be compared to when two notes or tones are played in an interval. The vibration of these notes or tones create a third tone, which is found to be in harmony or proportional ratio with two primary tones creating it. It is important to note that we refer to these as philosophical salt, sulfur, and mercury, because when we refer to them in this way, we're not referring to the physical salt, sulfur, or mercury, but rather to underlying states of being and matter as generating material reality in its varying permutative forms. Given that our practical portion of this series will be the creation of a spagyric tincture, and in Spagyria the vegetable kingdom is the first work, we'll generally be speaking about plant materials rather than minerals or metals unless specified. In Spagyria, the Tria Prima respond to the body, soul, and spirit of a thing. The salt is the physical body or dense physical constituents of a substance, anything reducible to ash. The sulfur is the soul of the substance, which takes the form of oils, for instance, essential oils of a plant. And the mercury is the spirit or fluid life force of the substance, which in the case of plants is the alcohol which is fermented from it. This is where we get the term spirits for alcohol. These three constituents can be further broken down into fixed and volatile polarities. For example, fixed sulfur being the resinous substances which typically contain the color and alkaloids of a plant material, and the volatile sulfur being the essential oil content. Fixed mercury is the acidic acid of the plant material, and the volatile mercury is the ethanol. Fixed salt is technically referred to as salt of salt. It is produced by calcining and leaching the herbal biomass of the plant, the ash. The volatile salt is called the salt of sulfur and is produced by calcining and leaching the fixed sulfur or resinous mass of the plant material. These principles, being of a holographic and fractal nature, exist in everything. Therefore, they have transpersonal aspects as well. It's important to note that when we say holographic, we don't mean fake or illusory, but rather of the nature of a holographic image. What that means is that in a holographic beam, all of the information of the image or thing itself as a whole being projected is encoded into every part or aspect of that thing. For instance, in a holographic beam, if you were to split the beam projecting the holograph in two, you wouldn't have a split image, you'd have now two whole images. This is essentially the doctrine of the micro and macrocosm. An excellent explanation of this is in Michael Talbot's The Holographic Universe. I really consider this book essential reading for any occultist. So, for instance, in a person, the fixed sulfur might correspond to the color of the eyes, or the hair, or the skin. Volatile sulfur might be values, inherent talents, your essence, the things that make you, you. The Tria Prima are the roots of the four elements. They express them and exert a kind of governance over them. The four Empedoclean elements, fire, air, water, and earth, were thought to be states or qualities of matter, each existing in co-mixture with the others. Fire and air were thought to be rising, expansive, volatile, and were so considered the active elements. Water and earth were thought to be more sinking, dense, heavy, fixed. Therefore, they are considered the passive elements. Sulfur, being the active philosophical essential, is conceptualized as governing the operations of the volatile elements of fire and air, while salt, being the fixed polarity, governs the operation of the fixed elements of water and earth. Mercury, being the mediating, hermaphroditic philosophical essential, was thought to govern one of each polarity, air from the volatile and water from the fixed. Contemplation on this is a powerful and highly recommended exercise. These elements then give us qualities varying from dryness and heat to moistness and cold, and the permutation of all these. This has further applications in humoral diagnostic and homeopathic medicine. There is, however, one addition to the elemental aspects in alchemical theory: spirit, the fifth element, quintessence. While we do have in our Tetraktys model here something that can definitely be equated to this, spirit is an important concept to note, particularly when undergoing the specific alchemical work of producing what is called a quintessence. Here we now come to the monad once again, on a higher arc. These four aspects or phases of the one thing, monad, dyad of polarity, triad of the Tria Prima, and the quaternary of the elements, give us 10, the Tetraktys of the Pythagoreans. The left arm of the triangular Tetraktys contains the most passive aspect, and the right arm contains the most active, with Mercury in the center as mediator. This fourfold generation of the 10 has a correlation to the Kabbalistic glyph of the Tree of Life. Alchemy, like every other of the Western esoteric traditions, is elaborated to a profound degree by Kabbalah. The ability of Kabbalistic correspondences and synthesis to assist in the deepening of the alchemist's understanding and holistic picture of creation in its entirety is a powerful tool, to say the absolute least. What is significant about Kabbalah is not only its effectiveness in being a map of creation in its entirety, but also in its emanative cosmology. In essence, Kabbalistic philosophy revolves around the philosophical worldview espoused in our Hermetic Neoplatonic monism and emanative numerical hierarchy established here in the Tetraktys. It could absolutely be said with much profit that the Tree of Life is a lineal glyph of the Tetraktys. Alchemy, astrology, and Kabbalah form the three pillars of the Hermetic arts. Now, taking all this into account, let's take a moment to go over the Emerald formula. First, let's list a brief definition for each of the alchemical processes. This will help for clarification purposes later on. True, without falsehood, certain, and most true. That which is below is as that which is above, and that which is above is as that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing. Also, as all things are made from one, by the consideration of one, so all things were made from this one by conjunction. Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. The wind carries it in its womb. Its nurse is the earth, mother of all perfection. Its power is perfected if it is turned into earth. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, prudently and with good judgment. It ascends from the earth into the heavens, and again descends from the heavens to the earth, and receives the power and efficacy of things above and of the things below. By this means you will acquire the glory of the whole world, and so you will drive away all shadows and blindness. For this, by its fortitude, snatches the palm from all other fortitude and power. For it is able to penetrate and subdue everything subtle and everything crude and hard. By this means the world was founded, and hence the marvelous conjunctions of it and admirable effects, since this is the pattern by which these marvels may be brought about. And because of this they have called me Hermes Trismegistus, since I have the three parts of the wisdom and philosophy of the whole universe. My speech is here finished, which I have spoken concerning the work of the sun. The Emerald Tablet is thought to contain the entirety of the alchemical formula. But in order to extract this, the alchemist must distill its meaning by way of analogy. Let's view how this is done. Firstly, let's point out that the alchemist does not perform the natural processes. This is self-evident. Nature performs the processes which substances and chemicals undergo. However, the alchemist works with nature in these processes. The alchemist expedites these. What might have taken a very long time, perhaps ages, as nature's time is very slow, can now be directed, focused, and sped up by the intervention of a skilled human. Essentially, alchemy is a school of co-creation, with nature as teacher and as subject. That said, everything in nature constantly undergoes the processes of evolution and transformation. The Emerald Formula is derived from the Emerald Tablet itself in the following admission. The first stage, or the saline salt stage, is comprised of 4 processes. The first of fire. Its father is the sun. The processes of fire are incineration, calcination, and pyrolysis. Water. Its mother is the moon. The moon has, for as far back as we can go in historical record, been recognized to have a substantial relationship to water. The processes of water are dissolution, digestion. Air. The wind carries it in its womb. The processes of wind or air are filtration, aeration, separation. Earth. Its nurse is the earth. The processes of earth are crystallization, conjunction. These processes fall under the heading of the philosophical essential of salt. Salt itself can be equated with the passive polarity and embodies an admixture of these processes. Again, think of the holographic and fractal nature of these essences. The alchemists believed there to be a secret fire, which was the great animating principle of all life. Fire was central to the alchemical process. The athanor, or furnace of the alchemist, was the centerpiece of their laboratory. In a similar way, fire and sulfurous processes and analogies are constantly used in alchemical tracts and in the Emerald Tablet itself. These comprise guidance for the sulfurous or fiery part of the work. The sulfurous process involves fermentation. The Latin root of fermentation is the same as fever, fervere, to seethe or boil. The mercurial process involves distillation. The final process is exaltation and coagulation. This final process brings us to the most basic and essential tenet of all alchemical formula, solve et coagula. This is what Spagyria itself means, to take apart and then to put back together. This is also where the vital importance of the philosophical methodology comes into play. It is in the application of this philosophical process that determines the end result and whether the operation was alchemical or not, how these things were taken apart, when they were taken apart, and how and when they were put back together. Particularly in Spagyria, the use of philosophical salts, ultimately potassium carbonate, is unique. Overall, in alchemy, there is also a strong emphasis on God and spiritual endeavor rather than purely material curiosity. The alchemists of old took as their axiom ora et labora, prayer and work. It was only by the aid of the alchemists' highest conception of deity that they achieved any transmutation. Something that must be discussed at this juncture is astronomy and astrology. In his 4 pillars, Paracelsus lists physic, alchemy, virtue or philosophy, and astronomy as essential prerequisites for the application of Spagyria. The motion of the stars and planets is absolutely vital for the timing of agricultural operations such as planting, transplanting, composting, watering, etc., as well as when to undertake any of the alchemical operations such as calcination, distillation, fermentation, what have you. As mentioned in the first part of this series, Paracelsus was adamant that the actual positions of the stars and planets were integral to the processes of the art. While Vedic astrology utilizes sidereal astrology, it is not considered true sidereal astrology. Hence is astronomy essential. You must be able to follow the motions of the planetary bodies and constellations, and to do this, some gear and knowledge must be acquired. That's a subject for a future video. In general, the alchemical idea is that these stages, however many are undergone, usually either 7 or 12 depending on the system, must be performed over and over and over in repetition until the intended goal is achieved. Typically, it progresses from the plant or vegetable work to the mineral work. Paracelsus also performed what he called the animal work, which is less popular to modern practitioners. It is said that these stages represent different stages of creation, which nature underwent during cosmogenesis, or the beginning of the cosmos. These 7 or 12 stages then mean to represent the forces and powers of the 7 classical planets and the 12 signs of the zodiac. Just to note, using Western sidereal astrology, there are 13 zodiacal signs, with the inclusion of Ophiuchus, the serpent handler, falling between Scorpio and Sagittarius. A further integral correspondence, which some viewers may already be familiar with, are that of the signs of the zodiac on the human body. This diagram was carried and used by European physicians in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, again a clear reference to the macro and microcosmic doctrine. Further, these correspond to the 5 minor and 7 major, totaling 12 energy centers or chakras. Alchemical theory applies these not merely to the physical organism or salt of a person, but also to the sulfur and mercury or soul and spirit of a person. The etheric and astral, mental, psychic aspects of the human organism are of great importance, as much as the physical. Here are the most basic uses of astronomy and astrology in alchemy and Spagyria. The lunar cycle is of primary importance in alchemical operations, particularly with plants. The moon has a relationship with the watery tides of the earth, as well as the etheric, energetic tides. As it goes from dark to full, certain care should be taken to note which alchemical operation, or if growing and harvesting is also a part of your practice, agricultural operation should take place. During the period of waxing to full, there is an increase in available energy, expansion, and growth. During the waning to dark, or new, there is a decay, or separation of energy, a descending action which occurs. In the 12-phase system, each of the alchemical processes correspond to the 12 signs of the zodiac. Each process will be heightened or strengthened when the full moon is in that sign. It is a great practice to time the completion of the work to the conjunction of the sun and moon within 1 minute. The planetary days and hours are the other most basic method of astronomical and astrological timing for alchemical operations. For more on these, check out the Minor Arcana micro lecture I did on the planetary hours. In working with various materia such as plants, metals, or minerals, one must first find a suitable planetary correspondence for each. Each day being assigned to a planetary rulership, a particular operation can be timed for a material which corresponds to the planetary ruler of the day. These operations would ideally take place in the planetary hour of the day, which we know is always the planetary hour right after sunrise. For instance, the solar plant rosemary might undergo an operation on Sunday morning, just after sunrise. The planets themselves have further correspondences to specific operations. A theme at the forefront of the mainstream perception of alchemy, as well as in its ancient historical conception, is the transmutation of metals. The 7 metals utilized in this form of alchemy are corresponded to the 7 classical planets. This alchemical operation makes use of the ladder of the planets. Anciently, it was believed that as the planets spun in their orbits, they flung their metals into space, many of which landed on and contributed to the Earth's mineral and metallic composition. In a similar analogy, modern scientific studies have shown significant electromagnetic and other broad-spectrum frequency emanations from planetary bodies. Mineral alchemy is a particularly complex and potentially dangerous form of the Hermetic art. It requires a steady and practiced hand and can cause irreparable physical damage if performed incorrectly. This is why this work is typically not the first attempted, and I personally, as a caveat, do not recommend that you try any of that work. However, minerals and metal ores, which are culled from the earth, are considered preferable to any commercially produced product, as they are in their most natural state and are considered the purest substances among the three alchemical kingdoms of mineral, vegetable, and animal. In the alchemical view, these are not dead objects, but rather fixed, pure, and unmixed in nature. They are thought to be alive, growing, evolving, even producing seed. In the alchemical estimation, according to nature's way being extremely slow, these processes are just done at an imperceptibly slow rate. They also have their planetary correspondences and their respective alchemical operations. Let's now take a moment to talk about some alchemical terms and ciphers. Alchemy, having a highly mystified vernacular, must be understood in the context of its development. The alchemist Robert Boyle, considered one of the fathers of the scientific movement, sought to systematize the jargon so that it might be less obscure and more useful. It was in part due to the lack of such verbiage that so much of necessity remained vague and dependent upon which alchemist at which time period was the author. While some terms have similar meanings at large, we can never assume that such vague but colorful terms, as the green lion perhaps, have a one-to-one correspondence throughout alchemical literature. It is in the practice of operative alchemy that one usually comes to find elucidation of such terms. You must see what they saw, rather than simply reading what they wrote. The pelican typically represents distillation and the beginning of the red phase. The eagle represents distillation and sublimation. Color is very important in alchemy as it is used to designate a particular stage or process. The white eagle, for instance, represents the whiteness of steam or vapor, whereas the red eagle or phoenix represents the final operation of coagulation. A double-headed eagle usually represents the alchemical rebus, the androgen, Mercury. An egg typically represents any kind of sealed vessel or enclosure, or womb-like state of gestation. The elements fire, water, air, and earth may respectively be symbolized by animals such as salamanders or dragons, fishes or whales, doves or eagles, and oxen or lions, respectively. Lions are significant symbols in alchemy. There's almost always an association with sulfurous, fiery principles and actions. The green lion was conceptualized as the soul of metals. The red lion was conceptualized as the life force which resides in the blood. Like lions, dragons in alchemy are expressed in terms of their level of refinement or purification by color. The black dragon is the unpurified first matter. The green dragon is the indwelling life of the metal. The red dragon is the pure, raw energy inherent in the black dragon, and it is present at the beginning and the end of the process. The Prima materia was conceptualized to be of a dual nature, similar to the black and red dragons, this being the Latin for first material. It was at once thought to be the unpurified material which the alchemists started their operations with. At the same time, it was the underlying substance which was purified of all its accretions and imperfections. Curiously, or perhaps significantly, it retained its designation of first, even after it had undergone the several processes. Something to meditate on. Finally, let's have a look at the spiritual implications and applications of alchemy. All of these processes and states have their analogy in everything being holographic and fractal, but most significantly in humans. We're the only being on this earth that can observe and assist in these processes. We can participate to the degree of directing these forces and, by extension, catalyze these corresponding processes within ourselves. The alchemical process, as applied to a plant or a material for the alchemist, is an exteriorized process, mirrored on an interior level, in the operator, and vice versa, a microcosm of our relative macrocosm. The practical transmutation, the production of the stone, the elixir of life, aurum potabile, the alchemical marriage, the powder of projection, these are entirely dependent on the alchemist first transforming themselves. This must happen on an interior level, and yet these processes are designed to mirror and catalyze just that. It is a mystery old as time itself. This holographic fractal reflection of the microcosm and the macrocosm. All these techniques can be and are combined with ritual and meditative techniques, initiatic alchemical processes and operations, focus, attention, breathwork, activation and engagement of all the magical powers and faculties. In initiatic orders such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the grade systems are said to be alchemical. The candidate is ossirified, taken apart, dissolved, purified, and then put back together. One of the many Kabbalistic and magical diagrams and acronyms given them during this process is the alchemical VITRIOL. Visita interiora terrae, rectificando invenies occultum lapidem. Visit the interior of the earth. Rectifying therein, you will find the hidden stone. Spiritual alchemy is an interior process of dissolution, the bringing to the fore an examination of a certain aspect of the self, in order to bring awareness to that which was previously automatic, something we were ignorant of, to bring light to darkness. Yet this isn't the paltry cliché of shadow work, so often tossed around by the spiritually illiterate. Shadow work is a Jungian concept and requires a Jungian therapist. And while Jung did help integrate psychology into the alchemical worldview on a mass scale and vice versa, his ideas ultimately fell short of the true spiritual potency and worldview. A final analogy to end part 2, before we head into practical application. In the Republic, Plato, via Socrates, offers the perhaps poetic analogy of there being 4 types of men, each with a particular metal in their souls. These are iron, copper, silver, and gold. The men with souls of gold are the philosophers, true to the meaning of that word in its purest sense, lovers of wisdom. The philosophical ideal of Plato's Republic is the sovereign who is ruler over all because they are supreme ruler of themselves, guided by the highest possible conception of the good, and aware of their own being only in a subordinate relationship to manifesting the will of the good. The philosopher king, the summum bonum, not merely an ambassador, but a literal vessel of the divine in the material sphere. Well, now you have a place to start and some basics with which to begin thinking about, perhaps, practical spagyric alchemy, which we'll be pursuing in the next episode of this lecture series. What are some things that I couldn't fit into this video or just left out? Help me out, help the community out, leave your thoughts and opinions in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the Arcanvm Patreon or a one-time donation to help me continue to produce rigorously researched, well-produced, and practiced content such as this for free. Join me again in the next video where we'll dive deeper into the history, theory, and practical sides of this and many other related topics. Thanks for watching. In Luke's.